Yes, Your Worship, members of council. Next, we have presentation number 2, and 6.2, we have Lori Wills, Director of Public Works, as well as RideCo, to speak regarding the Town of Cobourg on-demand transit pilot results.
Good evening, and to council and members of the public. I don't have a presentation to actually show, but I do have some notes, quite a few notes put together about the report that we've published on the agenda. I realize there's an awful lot of information in that transit report, and I hope that my verbal summary will also help to explain some parts. I do have Renee Champagne here as well tonight, who is the town's engineering and public transit administrator, to help us answer some questions in case there are some more operational, more detailed technical questions that she may need to help us to answer. And I also have here representing the town's software providers, Josh Lawrence from RideCo. So although Josh isn't doing the presentation tonight, we do have him here in case there are some questions about the software. I know there's a lot of capabilities of this software and lots of stats to show that if you come up with any questions along the way that Josh might be able to help answer throughout the presentation or after for discussion. Okay, so I do really want to start tonight by thanking the town's transit ridership. We can't thank them enough for their patience and understanding as we've transitioned through this new way of providing transit operations. We know that we've had some bumps along the way, and we want everyone who uses Cobourg Transit to know that we have heard all of your comments and complaints at some times, and we have done everything that we can to smooth these bumps out as much as possible. We do also know that transit is never going to be perfect for everybody. Mostly because there are humans and there's vehicles and machines and technology involved. So everything, we're doing our best to provide the best service that we can for you, and especially a better service than we have been providing in the past. I also want to thank Century Transportation for adapting their operations in this pilot to this new approach, and also for PWT, their parent company, for recognizing the potential in the on-demand service in Cobourg, providing us with a lot of guidance based on their previous on-demand experiences in other municipalities. And from a staff perspective, we've had a very good experience implementing this pilot with the help of both our partners with RideCo and Century and PWT. And all of them have actually been very, very truly hardworking to understand and meet the needs of our community. So the point of the pilot, of course, was to trial a new way to provide public transit services here in Cobourg. Ideally, the goals were to increase ridership and subsequently revenue, reduce operating expenses, and at the very least, increase the level of service that is being provided to get better value for the cost of our transit system. And prior to the pilot, historical ridership was not proving to be on the rise, which could be attributed to several reasons, such as our reduced parking rates in the downtown area, unserviced areas, and lengthy ride times. So increasing parking rates is one approach to growing ridership, so that monthly transit passes are less expensive than parking passes. But in reference to our recent parking rate increase, the town has just gone from $15 a month to $25 this year, but to jump all the way past $60 a month to surpass a transit pass is going to take a very long transition time if it does ever happen for our town. So that was not considered an option here. Servicing new areas in town is another approach, which under a conventional fixed route system would involve creating a third and potentially fourth route for the east and west ends of town. Additional routes equals additional capital costs for large expensive buses and would substantially increase operating costs for the maintenance of those large vehicles and additional drivers. Reducing ride times for fixed routes also would involve additional vehicles and driver time under a fixed route system. Essentially, any expansion plan for a fixed route system has a direct correlation with budget expansion without necessarily increasing our revenue proportionately. So in order to get better value, a major change was necessary, and an on-demand microtransit approach in Cobourg was established utilizing our existing vehicles and contract operator through Century, who also brought on RideCo as our software provider. And council did approve the $40,000 for the pilot, which was for the new software, some hardware, licensing, and marketing expenses. Some good news are throughout this pilot, the public transit stream of the federal provincial Safe Restart program, the town was able to recover 50% of those expenses for the on-demand pilot. So prior to the pilot commencement, an on-demand team was formed with town staff, being myself and Renee, and occasionally our communications manager. We had RideCo, a representative from Century Transportation, and their parent company, Pacific Western Transportation, or otherwise known as PWT. The team met weekly to develop goals and KPIs, establish new virtual stops. We discussed marketing materials, methods, schedules, everything that was necessary to launch the pilot well in advance. As noted in the report, we did establish 3 goals along the way to measure the achievement of the goals, and those were that 1, a positive rider experience, measured by the ride ratings received, as well as the user survey study connected at the end of the pilot. Expanded service area, measured by the % of rides to or from new areas, which is all tracked by our software. And the third being to increase ridership, which is easily measured by the actual rides taken. The first goal was achieved, as was evident with an average ride rating of 4.74 out of 5 throughout the entire pilot. The user survey results also indicated a general consensus that the rider experience was positive. Typically, when a survey is presented, it is a common result that we receive more feedback from people who actually really dislike something because they're opposed and understandably want it to be known. However, in this case, those who are not opposed, we often don't hear from those who are not opposed to a survey. In this case, we were actually pleased to see that 84% of the respondents were in support of the on-demand service and wanted it to stay. The second goal was to increase service to new service areas, and the results showed that 39% of rides were to or from a new service area since the start of the pilot. This goal was providing transit service in a previously unserviced areas is actually one of the most important ways for the town to increase our ridership by providing it in areas that it never was provided in the past. So current and new riders are encouraged to suggest new virtual stops locations and for staff to consider if we are able to keep the on-demand service going. The third goal was to increase ridership. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't quite possible to operate the pilot during a normal ridership year due to COVID. The pandemic evidently had a major impact on ridership, even prior to the pilot. However, as of March 25th and since then, staff are very happy to report that ridership levels are starting to increase quite significantly, and certainly some of that recovery can be attributed to new riders who are utilizing the on-demand service. So hopefully you can see in the report that the key performance indicators suggest the service generally met the objectives of the pilot. A very important KPI that was monitored closely was the number of failed searches. Failed search is when there are more ride requests than available capacity on the buses to service those requests. The highest man times proved to be between 10 a.m. and 3, when it was noted that people were more and more not able to get the ride times they wanted during that busy peak period. The last stage of the pilot, we aimed to address that issue by commingling the conventional service with the wheel service, and this was done by utilizing 3 of our available small buses. The large conventional buses cannot service the wheels program because they're too big to maneuver through the residential neighborhoods and provide that origin to destination service. The new virtual stops were vetted to ensure that the large vehicles could access the streets that they were located on, but not all areas of town have wide enough streets and turns that accommodate a 30-foot bus. So now we have 3 buses servicing the whole town, which proved to be a much more efficient system where all buses were being used equally, and failed searches were reduced from 27% from the conventional side of service and 8% of the wheels to, when they were combined, it was reduced down to 6% of failed searches. So a very significant reduction. So now that we've seen the improvement in service with the smaller vehicles and the commingling service, we needed to understand what the same model looks like under normal pre-COVID ridership numbers and how much growth could the same service accommodate before more vehicles would be required. So RideCo was able, through their software and data collection during the pilot, they were able to simulate these circumstances which indicated that even three smaller buses than our own buses could accommodate our COVID ridership, but with limited growth capacity and eventually higher failed rates during peak times. 4 smaller buses may be necessary in the near future during peak ride times, and there will have to be a level of service established for failed ride rates that balances the operating costs for a specific service level. So yes, we want to reduce our failed search rides, but limiting them entirely means increasing our bus availability and increasing our fleet. So there is a balance to say there's a certain percent that's allowable failed searches so that we can keep our buses and our operating levels at maintainable, sustainable for the type of ridership that we're aiming for. So to wrap up this report on the successes of the pilot, Josh may want to speak to the fact that Cobourg is one of the highest producing point-to-point on-demand services in the industry, and I was hoping that maybe he could elaborate a little more on what this means for Cobourg.
Yes, thank you. So what we've seen in the industry is that typically a point-to-point program, so from a stop to a stop, or in the sense of wheels, from the curb to curb option or doorstep to doorstep, anything that surpasses 5 passengers per revenue vehicle hour tends to be very strong and impressive. And what we've seen over the last few weeks of April is the town of Cobourg has consistently been surpassing that 5 passengers per revenue vehicle hour. So what that means is if we have 3 vehicles on the road, those 3 vehicles are on average completing 5 trips each in that single hour. And then that's aggregated throughout the day. So in some periods of the day, like the peak periods, we would have higher, close to 7 passengers per vehicle hour. But in aggregate, anything over 5 throughout an entire day is really strong. And this compares to some of our larger point-to-point programs like Calgary in Alberta or San Antonio in Texas.
Great. Thank you. So now that I have summarized the successes of the pilot, we also did have some downfalls along the way that are of note. Our biggest concern or most frequent comment received from riders who do not have smartphones or computers, who were very concerned about not being able to book a ride home while they were at their destination. Others were not willing to call into Sentry to make appointments for the bus, and we've been encouraging riders to book their return ride home when they book their pickup time, similar to how you would know when to plan to be at a bus stop on your way home on a fixed route system. So if you, for example, if you wanted to go shopping and you know that the bus stop's at your store on the hour, then you would plan your shopping trip so that you're ready to be at the bus stop on the hour to get your fixed ride home. So similarly, you can book your return ride home by essentially booking your return ride home based on what you used to do for your fixed ride service, and working backwards to meet that return ride home time and have it booked in advance. Another important note is that our Wheels ridership have always had to book their time in advance. Since the very beginning of the program, they've always had to book their time in advance, and we do believe that as time goes on, more and more people will give it a try. However, as a result of the user survey, we did receive 16 submissions from people who were not willing to try the service, even after the 1 year of offering on demand. So we have come up with an option for council's consideration to address these concerns, and that service is offered under option 2.
Learn how to talk.
So another issue we've had is vehicle reliability. As you know, our large buses are very old and have been out of service frequently and for long periods of time this year, causing Sentry to have to use alternative and less ideal vehicles. When a bus breaks down during service, there can be delays or cancellations of pickups, and when a different bus shows up at a pickup time that the rider wasn't expecting, it's confusing, and rides can get missed for that reason. For the on-demand system to be successful, we can't afford service interruptions from vehicle breakdowns, since, especially during our peak busy times, there aren't available pickup times available to reschedule a rider and ensure they get to their destination on time. So just as critical of a decision as the service options are the vehicle options. Before I explain the service option, I'll first review the vehicle options so that you can picture how the different types of vehicles apply to each service option. So we're calling vehicle type A is the minibus, and it's the smallest option available. The seating ranges from 3 ambulatory to 3 mobility aids, or up to 7 in 1. When I say 7 in 1, or it's 7 ambulatory and 1 person with a mobility device. And although the RideCo simulations show that these types of vehicles will work for the current commingled system, there isn't a lot of room for ridership growth, and there isn't a lot of room on the actual vehicles. Compared to our current wheels vehicle, they're quite cramped, making it challenging for our riders to maneuver on and off the vehicles. Some of these vehicles also have stationary seats that sit quite high up off the floor, and we feel that these may not be ideal for our elderly riders and those with less mobility. They are, however, capable of doing the job, they are accessible, and they are the most cost-effective option. The type B vehicle that we're considering is our wheels bus, the same model as our wheels bus. It's 8 meters in length, has a lot of seat arrangements from 12 and 2 to 14 and 1. This type of vehicle is much more spacious than the minibus. It has a flat floor and allow for more growth in ridership than the minibus. And the typical price is about $40,000 more than the minibus. And as noted in the report, it was noted just days before this report was published that we learned the Metrolinx TPI was actively working on a joint procurement for this type of bus, which has a hybrid option as well. So the TPI will only proceed with the procurement if there's enough interest from the member municipalities. But unfortunately, since this is the first hybrid procurement they've done, we do not have a good idea of what the cost might be for this type of vehicle, or any data available yet to know if it's worthwhile from a cost-benefit perspective as far as savings on fuel and savings on emissions compared to the extra cost for the actual vehicle. So we also don't have an idea of the time frame for receiving a vehicle through the TPI program. Ideally, we are able to find something that's in stock locally to expedite our increasing our fleet options, but we will keep council informed on the hybrid options, and obviously have to come back and seek approval for additional funds if needed. Type C vehicle, the third option, is basically the same as Type B, but it's slightly longer. It's a meter longer and seats about 19 people, or 13 and 3, or 18 people and 12 and 2. And that's, again, another $40,000 on top of the Type B bus. For any of these options, the town has 73% funding from the federal provincial ICIP transit stream. So service options. Option 1 is what I've started off with tonight, is our current operations, the 3 commingled small buses, with only 2 town-owned of those 3 small buses utilizing the small Century bus. We will still need a backup bus to maintain our reliability. The backup bus for this arrangement is currently a small school bus with the lift, which, although is accessible, is not ideal, and it has steps, and it looks inconsistent to our remaining vehicles, and that's also confusing for our riders. Only one backup bus for 3 buses is a bit of a risk, as we have experienced this year. The ideal approach is to purchase 2 more small vehicles and rotate the use of the town vehicles to lengthen their life cycle, and that's what was included in our budget for this year. This service deliverable has a variety of vehicle purchase options, all of which bring our fleet up to a much newer and smaller version, and hopefully lower operating and maintenance expenses. The vehicle purchase prices are in the report, and we have options to purchase either 2 Type A or Type B vehicles, or 1 of each. The more risky approach is to buy just 1, and if this is chosen, then we would recommend a Type B, the wheels larger bus, as opposed to a minibus. Option 2 service includes everything from option 1, but it adds a new limited fixed route system, and this is in response to our riders who were not willing, able, or comfortable with booking rides in advance. The limited fixed route would involve 1 vehicle operating a consistent route to a selection of highly utilized stops around town, only utilizing 1 vehicle and only operating during peak ridership times of about 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday to Friday. This option is expected to be the most expensive because we'd now be operating 4 buses. The vehicle options for the new fixed route could utilize our newer 30-foot bus and the older two 30-foot buses as backups. But as previously noticed, our two older 30-foot buses are at the end of their useful life, so continuing to operate them beyond that could lead to high repair costs. So if we are going to move to a model that requires these larger buses, we would have to commit to unexpected repair costs in order to maintain a reliable system for the riders. Alternatively, we can purchase a Type C bus for that fixed route and sell the older two large buses. This way we'll only have one 30-foot bus and a Type C bus to back each other up. Option 3, of course, is to revert back to the fixed route entirely as we're running before the pilot. And this would require us to replace our two older 30-foot buses immediately, since their procurement takes well over a year. This is the most expensive capital option and has an unknown operating expense if any of those old buses have a major mechanical breakdown before their replacement. It may also provide the least reliable service due to the age of those current vehicles. So quickly, cost-saving opportunities, as noted in the reports, a couple of decisions for council to make that may reduce costs for all of these options. Number one is to reduce the hours of operations to end at 9 p.m. instead of 10. Our ridership, both pre-COVID and during the whole pilot, has not proven to be financially worthwhile at a cost of $46 a ride during that 1 hour of ridership. This 1 hour change would reduce operating expenses by about $20,000. Second option is the call center hours. Currently, we provide an in-person answering service for all hours of the transit operation, actually with the exception of between 6 and 7 in the morning. That's a correction in my report there. Century has office hours that were noted in the report, and PWT covers the after hours for us out of the call center in Calgary. So, there's of course always a way to book online or using the pickup app 24/7, of course. And the third option is to reduce the after-hour call service provided by PWT. This option is based off of the data showing that after 7:30 our ridership drops off quite a bit. So if we were to provide a call service until 7:30, that would reduce our need for PWT for 2.5 hours Monday to Friday. And we could potentially drop Saturdays, the extended service on Saturday from 4 to 6:45 and also on Sunday. And this would reduce our call center costs of about $12,000. And there's several other options that we can work on with the call center hours that are either noted in the report or I could add more if needed. Again, I just wanted to note that when it was wheel service prior to our pilot, they have always had to book appointments, and we did not have a call-in center option on the weekends for our wheels members. So already by providing a call-in center at all on the weekends is already an increase in service that was part of our current contract with Century. The ability to call in at all hours is the most convenient and best level of service, and will also allow for the most ridership uptake due to its convenience. It does have significant cost, as you can see. Limiting the call-in hours may encourage more riders to book further in advance and use the online booking approach. However, it could also deter riders from using the system by not having that instantaneous ability to call and get a ride whenever they want. So there's pros and cons for the call service hours. The other operational savings that I noted in the report under 4 and 5 are actually more operational, and we will continue to monitor those on a staff level. So where we see that the ridership demands are changing and evolving, we will either increase or decrease the number of buses that are riding, and we can work with Century to develop new schedules to make the most financially feasible service provision through an operating process. But I wanted to note it in the report. There is a little bit of opportunity for some savings, but if ridership continues to go up, we do need to budget and ensure that we have enough service and enough budget to maintain the level of service that we were providing prior to the pilot. Okay, finally, we have to consider our current contract with Century Transportation now. The contract can be extended for another 2 years, for which the rates have already been established. Depending on how council wishes to proceed with the transit service, there could be some very different operations happening than was originally anticipated in the contract. So converting to a smaller, newer bus and potentially more of them, as well as the buses sitting idle in between ride times rather than driving constantly all day long, is quite a different operating system than having the two 30-foot buses driving on their fixed routes. So the large buses obviously are far more expensive to drive and maintain than our proposed fleet would be, being newer and smaller. So we would like the opportunity to revise our terms of reference with Century that would more easily or more accurately reflect the actual operating terms based on what comes from Council's decision here. And of course, as noted, we would also ensure that the terms would not exceed the current contract values that were negotiated for 2023 and 2024. So that brings me to the end of my summary for the transit options. I'm sure there are many questions and comments. Renee and RideCo are here, and we are happy to answer them for you now.
My request of council, if you have questions of clarification for Ms. Champagne or for Joshua, I'd ask that you might raise those now, but the actual debate and other questions for Director Wills can be done in item 11.2 when we get to our actual agenda under Public Works Services. And I would suggest we save the majority of those for the deliberations on the floor. And that way we can also be respectful of the delegates who have been waiting to present. So are there any questions for either Ms. Champagne or Joshua? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. Just a question for Joshua. The app that you've used throughout this on-demand service, I understand it uses a Google Map criteria to find locations. I tried it once and I ended up in Toronto. Is there any plan going forward to make it more centrally located to the communities that you're serving as opposed to an overall Google Map throughout Ontario?
So it should be able to default to your current location if you allow it to, and then it would just zoom right in on your area within Cobourg. With that being said, this is PWT's app. They have multiple deployments on it so that they wouldn't want to specifically zoom in on any one of those deployments that are using this app. Hope that just helped answer.
Deputy Mayor, somewhat. Are there any other questions or clarification, members of council? Seeing none, that brings our presentations to closure. And Mr. Lummer, over to you for item number 7. To Ms. Champagne and Joshua, thank you.
Next, Your Worship, we are into delegation, section 7 of the communal agenda, and first we have 7.1. We have Jenna Fitzgerald, of owner George and Orange, to speak to a request for an exemption to the zoning bylaw to accommodate a temporary patio expansion.